Today I'm going to tell a quick tale of my Ritchey bike. As many people may know, Tom Ritchey is one of the founding fathers of mountain biking, along with many others like Otis Guy and Gary Fisher. Joe Breeze might be one of them. I think Charlie Cunningham. Anyways, I've always wanted a Ritchey bike. I've had many bikes with Ritchey Logic tubing, and I've always loved the ride of steel. I have owned aluminum mountain bikes. I have owned aluminum full suspensions. I have a carbon fiber mountain bike, and yet the Ritchey still is a magic feel to me. Now, Ritchey's a custom frame builder, and I was never able to buy a Ritchey until they started making this model here, the P29er Sun Glare. And that's because they started making them overseas instead of having them built by Ritchey. And I think that was 2012. 2013. That's what I tripped on. And so when the sales rep came in, said they were available and he can get one, he was a rep for multiple products, and he picked up Ritchey to sell, and it was automatic. I went and got it, and this is 2013. It was pretty pricey. I mean, it was $900, and that was the cost. I worked at a bike shop back then, and that was frame and fork. And I picked up odds and ends like a Ritchey headset. I had a Ritchey stem on it, Ritchey seat post. I still have the original Ritchey saddle, which is scuffed up from my butt. But I have no need to replace that saddle because it's actually very comfortable. Well, as comfortable as bicycle saddles get. Now, this bike's been through many incarnations of parts, but the Ritchey wheels, fork, frame have stayed the same. I mean, I pretty much changed everything else on it probably 2 or 3 times since then, just because as I've gotten older, I want to sit more upright, so I've gone with a shorter stem, more spacers under the stem to bring the headset up, and the stem and handlebars up, and I could still go up that distance right there, which is good because next year or the year later I'm probably going to want that. But at some point I'll have to get a longer fork, and I did change the fork for about a year, and then I put the Ritchey fork back on. I just felt it was more compliant. And yeah, so that's when I got my Ritchey bike, was about 2013. I have had a triple chain ring on it, and I went to a double chain ring. But these cranks right here, I'm pretty sure are a late 90s, early 2000s square taper crank set. And yeah, every time I look at newer cranks with the through spindles, they're not any lighter. They may be stiffer, but yeah, and I'm not going to pay. The new cranksets are a whole lot of money, and these just haven't given me an issue. And anybody that's ridden Raceface products knows that Raceface is a solid brand and are very durable. I'm still using the Ritchey Z-Max tires. I still think they're some of the best gripping tires. They still sell them. They're still on the market after all these years. But they're pricey, so I kind of let my Ritchey tires. These ones are in good shape, but if I had to replace those, because Ritchey tires now are about $80 a pop, I'd probably end up going with like Continental Race Kings or something, because they're a lot less expensive and fairly durable. But yeah, all the years of wanting a Ritchey bike, and I wasn't able to really swing one until they started making them overseas. Now, before I got the Ritchey, I had a lot of different On One bikes. It's an English brand. I've had On One inbreds. They were steel bikes. And 26s, 29ers. I've owned titaniums from Fuji Titanium way back in the early 90s when Fuji was a popular brand, and that would also go with Mongoose. That was a bike shop brand. Now they're not known to be such high-end brands, but back then they were. But since I've gotten the 29er, I really haven't gotten a lot of other mountain bikes besides my On One Carbon because of the ride quality this gives. Bonus feature. Yeah, I get told quite often, you can't ride where I ride because you don't have any suspension. And when you ride a hardtail, you get beat up and it's just too harsh of a ride. That may be true because I have had aluminum mountain bikes and my carbon mountain bike is quite a bit stiffer. But with my Ritchey, I've never felt that way. I think it has partially to do with, in the old days, you had much smaller diameter seat posts. So there's a lot more flex there. The frame flex, the frame will definitely flex this way and definitely flexes that way. With your higher quality steel tube sets, that's what happens. And plus we're going tubeless the last 15, 20 years. Everybody's gone to tubeless. You're able to run lower PSI. And even back in the tube days, I never felt that. And I would always tell people, if you ride with your legs loose and your arms loose, you have a lot less issue with that. Now, when you ride with a rigid fork, you learn how to ride loose and smooth because you have no choice. It will jar you. But compared to, let's say, my carbon, which I have a full carbon On One with a rigid fork and even with the tubeless tires, it's a harsher ride. I don't feel like I get beat up on a steel bike. Now, one thing that this has over a full suspension is I'm beating myself up less on the uphills because hardtails are more efficient climbers, at least on the smoother terrain. Full suspensions will get traction where a hardtail you have to make traction. So do with that as you will. But I feel if I'm climbing more efficiently in my downhills, I'll be fresher for those, and I can keep the guys in sight on the full suspensions. Some of the faster guys, I have to let them go, but in general, I can hang with my rigid bike. But yeah, steel has a flex that lends itself to a smoother ride. And like I said, the smaller diameter seat post, as where now everything is, well, this is a 27.2. That was a standard back then in the steel days. And now everybody's on 30 millimeter, 31, 32 millimeter seat post diameters, and they're a lot stiffer. Today's modern hardtails, the stiffness does lend for sprintiness and quickness, but it doesn't lend itself to compliancy. And that's where the full suspensions come in. All right, there's the little bonus feature on steel ride quality. The people that know. The people that just get on a full suspension could never imagine this because they rely too much on the suspension and not on their body movements. And yeah, that's my half-ass bullshit story of my Ritchey. I've always loved the red, white, and blue color scheme. I've always wanted a P21, a P23. I see them on eBay all the time, but they hold their value fairly well, so it's not like I could just go snap and go build up a retro one. But on a cool note, this thing is a conversation starter, and it's not because of the red, white, and blue. Most people now, I say, are overbiked. They're riding fairly smooth trails with 6 inches of travel front and back, and there's no real need for that. But they are surprised that I'm riding a rigid fork and a rigid frame. And anybody, I'd say, over that 40, rolling up on 50, who's been mountain biking, for 20, 30 years, probably 30 years. Yeah, they see my bike and they got to stop and talk about it, because in the 90s, Ritchey ruled the roost as far as World Cups, championship racers, and there's a whole lot of history. Modern mountain bikes wouldn't be what they are without Tom Ritchey. There's Tom Ritchey right there, because he's the one who came up with all the geometries for modern mountain bikes. Now, granted, head tube angles have gotten sloper, rakes have gotten different. That's the rake of the fork, the angle of the fork. And but before that, they were on coaster brake bikes, and Tom Ritchey's kind of the one who started the whole mountain bike market. Actually, in the 80s and early 90s, they'd say ATB, all-terrain bicycles, versus MTB. Somewhere along the line, I'm sure there was a lawsuit. I'm sure somebody marketed it, and now we say MTB. But essentially the same thing. And yes, and one last thing. Oscar's been on my Ritchey for a very long time, and still works. Most people with those bulb horns, they end up ripping off, and this one has survived. Oscar has survived, and he matches the bike well. All right, hopefully this was a little entertaining, a little bit of history, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video.